Hello everybody, Blake here. We're gonna do a little bell talk today. I want to see maybe about making this a certain type of video that I do. We'll just talk about one specific bell and some differences over the years and all that. So we're gonna do two bell talk today. We'll talk about some differences in raised letter two bells that some of you may have not known, and then we'll talk about just a couple things on early 2000s and some 90s. So we'll just kind of go from there. But you can see here I got a handful of two bells set out. Couple of them. I have a just a 90s two bell, a early 2000s non-raised letter two bell, and then the rest of these are all raised letter twos. So we'll kind of get into it here. So 90s two bells, and I should say basically what I'm going to be talking about is nozzle difference and then bore differences, and then also some machining differences that you may not know. But so we'll start with the 90s two. 90s twos typically have a pretty a thinner nozzle. They don't have much of a angled cut on it, like some of the later bells do, like this early 2000s. If I can get a good angle, you can tell the nozzle ring actually has a little bit of a angle into the bore itself. And also on this one here, you can really, if I can get down on it, you can really see that cut angle right there. It's not straight. A lot of 90s twos are fairly straight. I know some of them do have just a slight angle to them, but not really enough to tell there. You can see it's basically a straight cut down on the bore. And then it's fairly thin compared to some of the later nozzle rings. The bore itself is just a flat cut into the throat. Doesn't have any angle or curvature to it other than just a little bit of file work from the factory, nothing too crazy. And then our early 2000s, you start to see a little bit wider, let me get on it here, a little bit wider of a nozzle ring. And then you also start to see a difference in the actual cut, the inner cut on the nozzle ring. It's actually got more of an angle to it down to the bore. No depth difference in bores here. Overall, I mean, I think there's a little bit of a depth difference, not a lot though. It's straight cut into the throat of the bell. No curvature or no angles or nothing like that. Overall machining, this one's a little hard to tell because somebody, see if I can zoom in, whoever had it before me kind of used a wire wheel on it and really kind of chewed up that a little bit. This one, see if I can get, I don't know if I'll be able to get a very good angle where you guys can see. It's basically just straight lines on that, nothing too crazy. And then of course, the 90s too has a big inlet, and then the rest of these all have small inlets on the foot. But this bell in particular right here is one that I don't know if very many people know what these look like. This is a very first run raised letter two bell. So you can clearly see it's raised letter two. This is their chime, both sides. Does not have a ghost circle anymore because it is raised letter. But this was the very first run of these raised letter bells. And how you can tell is because of the nozzle ring itself. It's a very pretty thick, pretty wide nozzle ring. Has a serious angled cut to it. You can really see it there. Does not have any angled or curved cut into the throat of the bell. Basically these two bells look exactly like the twos on the first gen or the early K5HLs, that black one over there. That's an early K5HL. The twos are basically identical to each other, and those horns were right before the raised letter ones came around. So this one is a really cool one to have. I've tried to build a K5LA with all of my very first run RL bells, and it doesn't sound very pretty. So I think it's better used as a K5HL or some type of horn where you don't have A bells, because this too really clashes with A-tuned bells. It was part of a K5LLA that was all first run RL bells. It sounded pretty close to the early non-raised letter K5LLAs, except for did have the non-two-piece RL L1, so it had the more modern sound to it, but it didn't sound bad as a whole. So this one's a really cool, unique piece that you really don't see a whole lot. And then these were produced, and then its next formation after that was this. This is still a non-deep bore RL2. Same story, raised letter. Although now you can start to see some modern changes that they did compared to the very first run that were still a lot like the non-raised letter bells. This you're starting to see stuff that we're a little more used to. You have an angled cut into the throat of the bell. The nozzle ring is cut on both sides at an angle, inside and out. Unlike this one, which is that's a completely straight cut right there. This one you can see, if I can zoom in, you can see it's angled on both sides, much thinner surface that the diaphragm is actually sitting on. And then your next step up from this would be the very first deep bore 2. This particular deep bore 2, this is I think it's from a horn that was built around 2009, really early 2010, which is a lot earlier than what I thought they started doing deep bores. These two, this bell and this bell, are very close time frame wise. The machining is basically the same, all except for the actual boring of the two now. You can see on this one there's not a lot of machining actually on the bore surface. You can see some cut lines, and then this one you start to see a really start to see the cut pattern in there, and then you get the large curved cut into the bore, or into the throat itself. And this one, it almost looks like it's cross cut. It looks like they used a bit in both directions to do the milling on that. and then the outside you can see it's still just a straight lined cut on that. Something else to note is the actual cut on the bell itself. You can see some grinding marks from the factory there, where they had some overcast from the bell, and you can see some there. See if I can find a spot here. You can see overall, let's focus. You can see it's a pretty straight cut on there. You can actually see the cutting lines themselves. If I can get this to focus. Yeah, it's not want to work with me too well there. And then after these were produced, then they started to change. Basically the only difference from this bell to this bell is the milling process. So on these ones, this would be I believe 20, not 100% sure. I know 2016 bells have the same machining on them. So you can start to see a lot of circular cutting on the outside there. Now you just have a single directional cut on the bore, to where this one almost has a fancier pattern, more lining in it, especially like right in this area here. You can see it's really tight, looks like tight little squares. It's because they were cutting in two different directions. This one, the newer ones are just cut in one direction. Same bore depth between those two. Other than that, not a whole lot of changes. Still, with these being the board, since this one has that inner cut angle on it, these ones don't, because they're bored straight down. So your inner line on that is really straight cut all the way down, no angles or anything until you reach the throat of the bell. And then same thing with these. Literally the only difference between these two time frames is they changed up their cutting and milling process a little bit. Started to use the same bits for everything at this point. And I guess another thing, a little difference, is that your outer ring has a lot more of an angled cut to it right there. You can actually see it slants down a little bit. All your other ones, you don't really see that, unless if it's just a little bit wore. Zoom in there. You see it's fairly straight cut. This one has a little bit of a curvature to it right here, but it's nothing compared to this is an actual, like a diagonal cut right there on that. So those are just some differences, especially in the RLs. These two were basically here just for examples to kind of show the transformation in the years of RL2s that some of you may or may not know. I didn't know at first that there were deep bore 2s when I first got into the hobby, because I had a couple RL K3s that had this style. Kind of the I don't really know the time frame on that, but I know this is clearly, I mean, you could just see the difference over time and how they slowly changed all their processes to get the 2s to sound a lot better. So that's just kind of a simple show and tell. I wish I had better date information for you. I'm not the greatest on that. All I can really tell you is that this is straight out of the non-RL. So this is the very first RL run. This would be from the second RL run. This would be the third RL run, and then this would be the fourth to current RL run, as far as all the changes that you see here. And I know a lot of guys, they don't care too much for the RL bell sounds, or just the RL horns in general. I like everything. I like 80s, 90s, early 2000s, late 2000s, into RLs and all that. I love everything. So I just figured give you guys a little video, a little show and tell. Let me know if this is interesting. If anyone found any of this information neat or helpful, or you want to see more bell talk, I can kind of get my information together a little bit better, and we can do more. We can do 3 bells, 4 bells, 1Ls, 1s, 5s. We can do 3As, 4As, standard 4s, standard 3s, all that stuff, just to kind of show differences in manufacturing over the years, and then differences in sound and all that. So this is just kind of a little test video to see if you guys will find the bell talk interesting segment or not. So hope you enjoyed. Not the greatest at speaking, clearly, but hopefully y'all found some of that information helpful. So till next time.